The night flight from New York to London drifted through the upper layers of the atmosphere, a metal bird cutting silently across the ocean of stars. The hum of the engines was steady, hypnotic, the kind of sound that could lull even the most anxious traveler into uneasy sleep. Inside the dimly lit cabin, everything seemed calm. Rows of softly glowing seatbelt signs lined the aisle, and the faint aroma of coffee and reheated meals lingered in the air. Flight attendants whispered to each other near the galley, their footsteps muffled by the carpeted floor. Some passengers had already surrendered to sleep, while others scrolled aimlessly through their phones or watched silent movies flickering on seatback screens. In seat 8A, beside the window, sat Maya Kapoor, 29 years old, a marketing executive from New York who had spent the past week running from one client meeting to another. Her eyes had dark circles beneath them, and her phone, lying on the tray table beside an untouched cup of water, still buzzed occasionally with unread messages. She had turned it face down before takeoff, needing a few hours of silence. The soft light from the window illuminated her face, catching on the silver ring she always wore on her index finger, her mother's ring. Outside, endless clouds stretched like fields of white cotton beneath the wing. Maya leaned her head against the window, watching the faint reflection of her own tired eyes before they finally drifted shut. For a while, everything was peaceful. The kind of peace that only comes thousands of feet above the earth, detached from the noise, the rush, the chaos below. She dreamed of home, of her little apartment overlooking the Hudson, her cat waiting by the door, the smell of rain on the city streets. But somewhere deep in that quiet, a faint unease lingered. It began subtly, a small turbulence, barely enough to stir a drink or wake a sleeper. The plane trembled for a second, then steadied itself. Most passengers ignored it, accustomed to such shakes on transatlantic flights. But the flight attendants noticed. They exchanged glances, brief, professional, but knowing. One of them, a woman with her hair neatly pinned back, pressed a button on the intercom, speaking softly to the cockpit. Maya stirred, half awake, as the turbulence grew slightly stronger. Her water cup rattled against the tray, a few drops spilling onto her sleeve. She frowned, pulling a napkin from the seat pocket to dab it dry. Through her hazy drowsiness, she noticed the seatbelt sign flicker on again, followed by a calm announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the seatbelt sign. Please remain seated and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened." Her seatmate, an elderly man with round glasses and a kind smile, looked at her and shrugged. "Just a bit of rough air," he said. Maya nodded politely and returned to the window. But this time she didn't close her eyes. The clouds outside had changed. They looked thicker now, denser, like layers of smoke rather than mist. Lightning flickered faintly within them, lighting up the sky for brief moments before fading again. Maya couldn't hear the thunder, but she could feel the air pressure shift. Inside the cockpit, things were not as calm as they appeared. The pilots exchanged tense glances, fingers dancing quickly over switches and instruments. A sudden warning light had blinked to life on the control panel, something they hadn't expected. The captain's jaw tightened. He tapped the communication system, trying to raise air traffic control. The radio crackled, static swallowing his words. "Control, this is Flight 782 bound for Heathrow. Do you copy?" Only silence. He tried again. Nothing. Back in the cabin, the hum of the engines remained steady, but the atmosphere began to change. It wasn't obvious yet, not panic, not even fear, but something quieter. The way a room feels before a storm hits, a heaviness in the air, the kind that presses against your chest without warning. Maya felt it too. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the subtle change in tone among the flight attendants now moving briskly down the aisles. They smiled, yes, but their smiles were too practiced, too fragile. She reached down to tighten her seatbelt. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple, though the cabin was cool. The man beside her had fallen asleep again, his head tilted slightly forward. She envied him, his calm, his trust in the system. Then, out of nowhere, the intercom crackled. It wasn't unusual at first, but something about the timing made every conversation, every sound, pause mid-air. The static hissed for a second before a voice emerged. low, familiar, but tense. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the captain, his tone tight, deliberate, every syllable chosen with care. "May I have your attention, please?" Maya froze. The elderly man beside her lifted his head. Across the aisle, a mother hushed her crying child. The cabin fell into complete silence. The captain continued, but this time his calm professionalism had a faint tremor beneath it. "We're experiencing some technical difficulties, and I need all passengers to remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Please listen carefully to the instructions from our crew." That was all he said. Then the intercom clicked off, but it was enough to fill the cabin with whispers. Enough to make Maya's heart start beating faster. She didn't know why. Not yet. But something in that voice told her this wasn't just another bout of turbulence. As she looked out the window again, the storm clouds seemed closer, darker. The flashes of lightning more frequent now, like silent warnings written across the sky. And though she didn't know it yet, that announcement was the moment everything changed. The calm before the storm was officially over. The silence in the cabin was heavy, the kind that seems to vibrate against the skin, pressing against every heartbeat. A few murmurs rippled through the rows, uncertain and uneasy. Somewhere behind Maya, a baby began to cry. The air felt colder now, thinner. Then the intercom clicked on again. "This is your captain speaking." The voice that filled the cabin was the same one they'd heard earlier, calm, deep, professional. But now, there was something new in it. A tremor, a human edge. Every word sounded as though it was being measured, forced out through clenched teeth. "We've lost communication with air traffic control," he said slowly, "and our navigation systems appear to be malfunctioning. We're currently unsure of our exact position." For a heartbeat, there was silence, and then a wave of gasps, murmurs, and sharp intakes of breath. People looked around, searching each other's faces for reassurance, but finding none. A woman across the aisle reached for her husband's hand. Someone further back began whispering a prayer. A man in a business suit tapped his phone frantically, staring at the no signal icon as if sheer willpower could bring the bars back. The flight attendants, trained for chaos, moved swiftly down the aisles, their smiles now tight, rehearsed. "Everything is under control, ladies and gentlemen. Please remain calm and seated." But even they couldn't hide the nervous flicker in their eyes. Maya felt her pulse in her throat. She stared at the seat in front of her, trying to steady her breathing. Lost communication? Malfunctioning systems? She tried to make sense of it. Wasn't there always a backup? Didn't planes have redundancies for everything? She looked out the window. The clouds below were thick and swirling, endless white, turning to dark gray. No city lights, no coastline, no stars visible through the haze. Just the faint flash of lightning in the distance, like a warning. Then the captain's voice came again, sharper this time, the controlled calm of a man fighting panic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we're running low on fuel. We need everyone to stay calm and follow the crew's instructions carefully. We're going to attempt an emergency descent to locate a safe place to land." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, running low on fuel. Maya's stomach twisted. The engines, which had once been a comfort, now sounded ominous, a dull roar that reminded her how small and fragile this metal capsule really was. The elderly man beside her crossed himself quietly, lips moving in prayer. The cabin lights flickered once, twice. The plane gave a sudden, violent jolt, and several passengers screamed. Drinks spilled, luggage rattled overhead. Maya clutched the armrest, her knuckles white. Her heart was pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. Outside, the clouds seemed to explode with lightning. Thunder rumbled, faint but deep, echoing through the fuselage. The entire aircraft shook as it entered a pocket of turbulence. The seatbelt sign blinked brighter, almost warning them, "Hold on." Maya tried to focus on breathing, in and out. Around her, panic spread like fire. A young mother tried to soothe her child, rocking him gently despite her trembling hands. A man stood up, shouting something about contacting the authorities, only to be ordered back into his seat by a flight attendant who was barely holding her composure. From the cockpit, the first officer's voice came on briefly, lower, calmer. "We're descending through 20,000 feet. Please remain seated." Then, silence again. Maya turned to the window. The storm outside was alive. Flashing lights, rolling clouds, streaks of rain that blurred the glass. For a brief second, she thought she saw the ocean below, dark and endless, but it disappeared just as quickly. The oxygen masks hadn't dropped yet, but she could sense they weren't far from it. She closed her eyes, remembering something. Her father used to tell her whenever she got scared as a child, "Breathe. You can't control the storm, but you can control yourself." She inhaled shakily, exhaled, looked around. People were crying now, quietly, helplessly. Others gripped their seats or whispered last words to no one in particular. And then, a sudden deep bang shook the plane. The lights flickered again, dimming to near darkness before returning. The aircraft lurched downward, the nose dipping slightly. A few passengers screamed. The captain's voice cut through the chaos, strained but firm. "Brace positions, everyone." "Heads down, stay calm," the flight attendants began shouting instructions. "Heads down, arms over your head, stay low." The calm professionalism of their training now mixed with raw fear. Maya obeyed automatically, bending forward, clutching her knees. Her mind went blank except for one thought. This can't be happening. The plane shuddered violently again. Overhead bins popped open, spilling small bags and jackets. The cabin was no longer a calm space between worlds. It had become a cage of panic suspended in the night sky. The once steady hum of the engines was now a roaring reminder of the uncertainty that surrounded them. The smell of fear was almost tangible, sharp, metallic, and mixed with the faint tang of burning electronics that no one wanted to acknowledge. People were crying, some whispering prayers under their breath, clutching hands across aisles. Others just stared blankly ahead, their minds too numb to process what was happening. The seatbelt signs glowed an eerie red in the dim light, flickering slightly with each shudder of the aircraft. Maya gripped the armrests so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears like the ticking of a clock. She tried to focus on her breathing, slow, deep, steady. But every time she closed her eyes, all she could see was the endless black ocean below them. The plane shook again, harder this time. A few passengers screamed as an overhead compartment popped open, spilling a cascade of bags into the aisle. The flight attendants rushed forward, shouting over the noise, "Stay seated! Please remain calm." But their own faces betrayed the fear they were trying to suppress. Lightning flashed through the windows, blinding, electric white, illuminating the terrified faces of everyone aboard. For a second, Maya saw her reflection in the glass, pale, trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. She wasn't ready for this. None of them were. Then the captain's voice came again, strained but steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're doing everything we can. Please trust us. We're attempting to descend below the storm layer to regain communication." The words were meant to reassure, but they only deepened the fear. Attempting. That one word echoed in Maya's mind. Nothing was certain anymore. The nose of the plane tilted downward. The force pressed her back against her seat, and the world outside her window blurred into streaks of lightning and rain. The roar of the engines grew louder, deeper, as if the aircraft itself was groaning in pain. Somewhere behind her, a child began to cry, a small, trembling sound that cut through the chaos like a blade. Maya's thoughts raced wildly. Faces of her parents flashed before her eyes, her mother's soft laugh, her father's quiet advice before her first big job. She thought of the friends she hadn't called in months, the apologies she never made, the dreams she had postponed for some day. And now, here she was, thousands of feet above the earth, realizing that someday might never come. The captain's voice returned one last time, barely audible through the static. "Brace for impact. The words sent a collective shiver through the cabin. Passengers bent forward, heads down, clutching the seats in front of them. The flight attendants hurriedly demonstrated the brace position again, their voices shaking as they repeated instructions. Maya followed automatically, though her mind screamed that this couldn't be real. The descent grew rougher. The plane jolted violently, tossing cups, pillows, and even loose phones into the air. Someone shouted a prayer in Spanish. Another recited a verse from the Quran. The sounds blended, fear, faith, desperation, all of humanity condensed into one fragile moment. Then, silence. No warning, no gradual calm. Just silence. The shaking stopped. The roaring engines softened to a gentle hum. The cabin, moments ago filled with cries, went completely still. Maya lifted her head slowly, afraid to move. Through the window, the storm clouds were gone. In their place was a vast expanse of dark sky, slowly giving way to a faint line of orange on the horizon. Dawn, and then the voice again. This time, calm, relieved, almost trembling with gratitude. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain began, his tone breaking slightly. "We've made it. We found a small military airstrip below. We're preparing to land. We're safe." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat, and then the entire cabin erupted. Some passengers sobbed openly. Others clapped through tears. A woman a few rows ahead hugged a stranger. A man kissed his wedding ring and pressed it to his forehead. The elderly passenger beside Maya covered his face and whispered, "Thank God." Maya could barely breathe. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face, feeling the warm tears she hadn't realized were falling. Every nerve in her body buzzed with disbelief and relief all at once. The engines shifted tone as the plane began its final descent. Through the window, she saw a narrow strip of land below, faint lights glowing through morning mist. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thud. The cabin jolted once, twice, then steadied. Seconds later, the wheels hit the runway. There was a rough bounce, then another, before the aircraft finally slowed. The sound of tires screeching against the ground filled the air, replaced by applause and cries of joy as the plane rolled to a stop. For a long moment, no one moved. They just sat there, breathing, crying, laughing, holding on to one another, as if afraid the moment might disappear. Finally, the captain spoke again, voice softer this time. "Welcome, back to solid ground." The passengers erupted into applause once more, louder, freer, not out of habit, but out of pure, unfiltered gratitude. Maya turned to the window. The first rays of sunlight broke across the sky, painting everything in gold. The wing of the plane, the runway, even the tears on her cheeks. She smiled faintly, whispering a thank you to no one in particular. When the doors finally opened and the cool morning air rushed in, she stood, her legs trembling but steady. As she stepped out, she looked back once at her seat, 8A, and felt a wave of emotion she couldn't quite name. Fear, relief, wonder. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time since the journey began, it wasn't sleep she longed for. It was life, every precious, fragile, miraculous second of it.